I am indeed greatly honoured to have the chance to address you as such an august body, and I have to say I'm rather surprised that anyone would want to hear my views on the European Union, but there you go. I guess in many ways there could be no more important topic to debate tonight than our own democracy. For me, it is inextricably linked with the debate about our relationship with the European Union. Now, I've been a candidate in each of the last 4 general elections, and I played an active part in the 3 before that. And I have to say that throughout that period, there has been no doubt that the general level of antipathy towards politicians has increased steadily over the years. And for many commentators on our political world, they seem to put the reason for this beginning and ending with the expenses scandal. Now, I've no doubt that the expenses scandal did play its part, and no doubt that that's one of the reasons why people have the view that they have of politicians. But it is, of course, a relatively recent occurrence. It's just the last couple of years or so. And I think that the public's view of politicians and the reasons for it are much more deep-rooted. The disconnect between a significant and growing number of the general public and what might be called the political class grows wider as the years pass. And we have to ask ourselves why. Now, whenever I question someone on the doorstep who is a declared non-voter, I hear time and time again the same explanations. I'm sure you've heard similar things. They usually go along the lines of, well, my vote doesn't matter. Nothing ever changes. And then you're all the same anyway, so why should I bother? I would submit that the underlying cause of all these sentiments is our membership of the European Union. Because it's for this reason that I believe there is no more important issue in British politics today. Now, I know that this puts me out on a limb, on the fringes of politics. And indeed, I have to admit that all the polling evidence shows that when you ask people what the most important issue facing them is, very few, if any, say the European Union. Now, I'm not surprised about this. And the reason I'm not surprised is that it is in the interests of the political class, where there is a cosy consensus about our membership of the European Union, to keep the focus away from the real culprit as to why politicians in this country are held in such low regard. Generations of British politicians have allowed powers to pass from our own United Kingdom Parliament to the European Union. And the result of this is that domestic politicians are becoming ever more impotent to deal with the problems which the public want to see dealt with. And indeed, the problems themselves very often arise out of our membership of the European Union. And this transfer of sovereignty, of course, has become something of a hot topic in Parliament since the general election, with the government's introduction of the European Union Bill, and in particular Clause 18 thereof, the so-called sovereignty clause, about which, of course, there has been much debate. Now, there are those who would argue that our membership of the European Union has actually enhanced our democracy. After all, we do now get to vote once every 5 years in European elections. Now, back in 1999, I was a candidate in the very first set of European elections to be held under the D'Hondt system of proportional representation. Some of you may remember was introduced by the Labour government of Tony Blair after the 1997 general election. And of course we were told at that time that because under proportional representation every vote counts, that the turnout would soar. Well, you will, I suspect, not be surprised to learn that in reality this was not the case. And in fact, the turnout went down from 36% in 1994 to just 24% in 1999. Now, of course, elections to the European Parliament are based around these giant Euro regions. Traditional British towns, cities, and counties are irrelevant in the world of the Brussels Eurocrat. And the regions themselves mirror the problem of the European Union. There is no commonality of interest. For example, in my own area of the northwest of England, this covers the rolling uplands of Cumbria with its hill farmers, the Lake District, the towns of East Lancashire, the whole of Merseyside and our great cities of Liverpool and Manchester, and not to mention the whole of the county of Cheshire. A population approaching some 14 million and just 8 representatives in the European Parliament. A situation that I know is mirrored across the country in other regions. And of course, it's not just the European Parliament that lacks genuine democracy. The commissioners are unelected. They are not accountable to the citizens of Europe. Let us take the case of the appointment of Catherine Ashton to the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. Mrs. Ashton was elevated to the House of Lords before being appointed to replace Peter Mandelson. And from reports at the time, Baroness Ashton was appointed to the European Union's Foreign Affairs portfolio as a consolation prize for the fact that Tony Blair failed to get what might be called the top job of the Council President. No election, but undoubtedly a spectacular rise to the top. And I understand that the Baroness is now one of the highest paid of all British politicians. But now, of course, following the Lisbon Treaty, there is the European Union's Citizens' Initiative. I don't know if any of you have taken advantage of this yet, but it's the EU's latest wheeze to try and convince us all that in some way we really can hold those Brussels bureaucrats to account. Now, all you need to do, if you've not taken advantage of it yet, is to contact 999,999 of your friends and collect their signatures, and not forgetting their passport numbers or their social security numbers, and there you go. But of course you have to have a pretty international list of friends and address book, because the petitioners have to come from 9 different member states. And of course, when you've gone to all this trouble and you've obtained your 1 million signature petition, there is absolutely no legal obligation whatsoever on the Commission to do anything about it and to ensure that your concerns are actually dealt with. And now, all these things are often described as the European Union's democratic deficit. Now, Mr. Chairman, I think I should declare at this point that on one level, I do not actually care very much whether the European Union is undemocratic or not. I do not care very much whether the European Union has a democratic deficit. Now, you may think that's a rather an odd position to take. But let me tell you why I take it. Why? Well, the answer is simple. I do not believe the European Union is a structure or an organisation that has that necessary commonality of interest to operate in the same way as a democratic nation state. Now, my view, I suspect, is directly opposite to those who see the European Union as part of a grand project to create a European superstate, the United States of Europe. Now, none of you will need reminding that the purpose of the original Treaty of Rome, of course, was to bring about the ever closer union of the member states. And the logical conclusion of this ever closer union is that eventually the sovereignty of every individual nation will be removed and taken over by an all-powerful European Union that will dictate what each member state must do. And without any doubt at all, I believe that we are already, sadly, a very long way down that road. And one of the reasons why we are so far down that road is that the architects of the grand European idea have been very skillful. They've been able to skillfully cloak their pet project with the authority of apparent democracy. So to this extent, I am very concerned about the democratic aspect of the European Union. And the dilemma facing Eurosceptics is this. If we were somehow able to fix this democratic deficit, would that make the European Union any more acceptable to us? I would venture to submit that it would not. So, Mr. Chairman, let me turn now to what I believe the solution to this undermining of our democracy. I believe that it is undoubtedly in the best interest of the citizens of our country that we should leave the European Union. Yeah. Now, I have to say that I have absolutely nothing against our fellow European neighbours. And I fully accept that if, and I'd like to think when we leave, we will need to explain our position very carefully and constructively. There will be many areas where we will want and need to make bilateral agreements with our neighbours to the benefit of our country's residents. This is not impossible. After all, we do it with lots of other countries around the world. And I believe we should maintain and indeed foster and develop the European free trade area. Now, I wasn't old enough to vote back in 1975, when the only time we had an opportunity as a nation to express our views about our membership of course, what was then the European Economic Community. But whenever I speak to people who did vote in that referendum, that's what they thought they were voting to join, a European free trade area, not some sort of giant European superstate. The question that faces us today, therefore, is how do we leave? Now, it would, of course, be possible for an incoming government to be elected with a mandate to take us out of the European Union. I think that is unlikely. It is far more likely, in my opinion, that we will have a referendum on our continued membership. However, I also think that those of us who believe that we would be better off outside the European Union should at this stage be careful about what we wish for. I think we need to be realistic. There is no guarantee that we would win an in-out referendum. Now, I know in recent weeks some people have drawn comfort from the fact that the AV referendum result went in favour of those who wanted to keep the status quo and first past the post system. But there is a fundamental difference. In the AV referendum, it was those who wanted AV who were the proponents of change. And those supporting first past the post were arguing in favour of the status quo. We have an in-out referendum. it will mean that those of us who are arguing to leave the European Union will have to make the case for change. So we need to ensure that there is an absolutely compelling argument and a compelling case to take to the electorate in a referendum. I just want to list 3 of the matters which need, I think, to be done well in advance of any referendum campaign. Firstly, we must construct a broad coalition of different groups from right across the political spectrum. I believe one of the reasons why the No to AV campaign was so successful last month was that they were able to reach out to both Conservative and Labour supporters. Now, of course, I realise that this might mean sharing platforms with people who are not normally our political allies. But the issue at stake here is far more important than any single political party. And secondly, we must anticipate all the arguments that will be thrown at us during a referendum campaign. We need to be ready with the facts and the figures and bomb-proof answers. These arguments will range from the loss of jobs to the loss of influence. Now, I referred earlier to the fact that very few people, when asked to state which issue is the most concern to you at the moment, actually mention the European question in the European Union. Where there is a problem, therefore, that has its roots in a particular European directive or a particular regulation, we need to ensure that the public are aware of the reason why there is a problem, and that it's because of our membership of the European Union, and that if we were not members, we would have the power to resolve the matter ourselves. And finally and thirdly, we must be ready to set out our case for a positive view of what life will be like outside of the European Union. We need to be able to demonstrate to British business that they will not be penalised in any way by our departure from the European Union. And we also need to be able to show how British businesses would benefit from being free of the social chapter and the working time directive. We need to be able to make the case for Britain becoming the place to do business, not just in Europe, but anywhere. And for individuals, we need to do things like being able to demonstrate that holidaymakers will still be able to travel to the Med for 2 weeks in the sun if that's what they want to do. And all this means a massive amount of hard work and planning. Now, fortunately, we are not short of Eurosceptic groups and think tanks. I'd like at this point to thank them, to pay tribute to the work that they do, and thank all of them for the help that they give us in Parliament. They stand up to the establishment and are prepared to put an alternative point of view. I have, though, just one suggestion. I just wonder if we would not all benefit if somehow all these various groups could not come together and hammer out a detailed and coherent strategy for us to leave the European Union. Yeah. We will be then free from the red tape, regulations and directives of the Brussels bureaucracy. We need to be confident that outside of the European Union, not only will Britain survive, but Britain will thrive. And once again, we will become masters of our own destiny, not only in Europe, but in the world.